Hello and welcome to the Science or Fiction podcast Neuroscience Edition. Over the next 3 episodes of this special series, we'll interview experts to separate the science from the fiction in headlines and media coverage of neuroscience research. I'm Chloe Carrick, a PhD researcher at King's College London, where I study adolescent brain development, and I'll be the host and producer of this neuroscience series.
And I'm Dr. Catherine Bates. I'm a Youth Development and Mental Health Research Fellow at King's College London, and this is the Science or Fiction podcast.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi. It's so nice to be here and not having to actually intro it and to hand over to you for a few episodes. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I am also very excited to be getting into some topics that I find very interesting and to be able to, interview some neuroscientists about some recent media coverage of different topics that are making headlines.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really helpful because neuroscience is such a complex topic. And I also didn't even know what a brain-computer interface was, until we started researching this podcast episode.
Neither did I. Well, I guess you hear bits about it in the news and it sounds very sci-fi-y, especially with, I guess, Netflix had their whole campaign with the nubbin, which was like a BCI-esque kind of device. So they're around, there's a lot of media excerpts on them, but it's a bit confusing what they actually are.
And it's also recently has just popped up. I don't know why it's getting so much attention right now, because I was reading that the first brain computer interface came around 20 years ago, so it's almost what's been happening in between then and now. Now we seem to be getting to a point where something's being rolled out in the NHS. How does that work?
I think it'll be really interesting to interview our guest about these questions because, I'm also unsure if they've been around for so long. Why are we seeing so much about them now?
Yeah, definitely. Should we get our guest in?
Yes, let's do it. Brain-computer interfaces sound like science fiction. They are systems that can be implanted into the brain and create a direct communication between the brain and an external device like a computer or a robotic arm. Now, we're not just seeing brain implants in sci-fi shows like Black Mirror, but they could be rolled out into healthcare. They've been featured heavily in the media lately, especially in stories about their potential to help people with disabilities control devices using only their thoughts. Some brain-computer interfaces are already used to support the use of prosthetics, and Elon Musk's brain implant Neuralink is currently being trialled in the UK in patients with paralysis. But how do brain-computer interfaces work? Are they safe to use? Can they really read our thoughts? And what are the implications of that? So today we are going to interview Dr. Hunter Schoen, an expert in brain-computer interfaces and researcher at the Rehab Neural Engineering Labs at the University of Pittsburgh, to answer these questions. Welcome, Hunter. Thank you for coming to talk to us today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me.
So maybe just to get us started, could you just tell us a bit about what you do, how you got there, and what role brain-computer interfaces play in your work?
Yes, how I got here. So the long story of the many years of college, hopefully. So I'm currently a neuroscientist. My specific title is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. And like a lot of people, I got here because I wanted to help people. So first it was I want to do medicine. And then I found medicine to be difficult. It was a lot of on your feet, sort of trying to treat a lot of patients very quickly. And that was not for me. And I felt like we really couldn't get at the underlying problem of a lot of disorders. Let me give you a quick drug, but we don't actually know what's going on with the disease itself. And then that sort of led me to neuroscience, which is what I've been doing for a while now.
I think that sort of clinical to research idea path in terms of career happens quite a bit, happened with me as well. I think I wanted to be a clinical psychologist for a while and then realized, no, I think I want to do research instead and do a PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, research is, I don't think we should be biased, but research is better than, I mean, maybe for me, it's cooler, I think.
Yeah.
We're trying to define what the next generation of medicine looks like, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
And then maybe could you tell us a bit about the role then that brain-computer interfaces play in your work?
yeah, so at the University of Pittsburgh, I'm a part of a clinical trial that has a pretty big vision. And the vision is there are people all over the world with very, very severe motor disabilities. We all know someone, whether it's they're missing an arm from an amputation, whether it's a spinal cord injury where they're fully in a wheelchair and they can't move their bodies at all, or maybe they can just move their face, or people with ALS that sort of slowly degrade in their ability to move their bodies and then eventually lose the ability to speak. So for all of these people, there are very, very few viable assistive technologies that exist. And it's to do for a variety of reasons, but one core reason is scientific. We have a very poor understanding of the brain, how to interface with the brain, translate signals out, and create devices that just work for people. So at the University of Pittsburgh, the goal of the clinical trial is we want to restore hand and arm control for people with spinal cord injuries that have lost it. So they have high-level injuries, sort of at the neck level, so they can talk, they can fully move their faces, maybe even move their arms a little bit, but they're fully wheelchair-bound. And we're doing a lot of research to try to understand how to build systems that can restore hand and arm control. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that I can talk about if you want.
Yeah, super interesting. I think we're getting at one aspect of what a brain-computer interface is and what it does. So that kind of leads on to my next question then is, could you describe what is a brain-computer interface? And also maybe touch a bit on how long these devices have actually been around?
Yeah, so what is a brain-computer interface depends on who you ask. In terms of a lot of people, there's a lot of current devices that look at muscle signals and that read out muscle signals, and some people call those brain-computer interfaces because the signal, I guess, comes from the brain. But how I view brain-computer interfaces and how a lot of people view them are devices that directly interface with the brain itself, read out signals from the brain, and do something with them, or provide input directly into the brain through like stimulation, like little electrical charges directly to the brain. What is a brain-computer interface? I would say that. And what was your second question?
So I guess how long have these devices been around? Because I know we're hearing a lot about them now, but I don't think they're just these new things, right?
No, they are not. They are, so at the University of Pittsburgh, we just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of someone in our trial that has 4 implants. 4 implants, and a lot of the foundational work that we really don't really understand yet is when you put devices into the brain, sure, they'll work in the beginning, but we don't really know how well these things work 2 years later, 3 years later, 10 years later. So while a lot of these companies are making a lot of these efforts to start to implant more people, a lot of this critical work is so important to understand how well these things will actually hold up many years later. And we are finding for certain aspects of these technologies, they do hold up, but they definitely degrade over time. And the signals they get, how clean and rich those signals are, also degrade slowly over time.
So I have a few things I wanted to pick up on from that. So first of all, the 4 implants. Why 4? So I think from my understanding, I think about just one person getting 1 implant, and that's how this works.
Yeah, so I actually came prepared. I know the listeners can't see my face, right? They can just hear my voice.
No, they will see
They can
you
see
as
your
well.
face.
Oh, they will see my face. Okay.
Unless you are specifically against that.
No, they can see my face. Okay, so for the viewers then.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
So
we have a prop. Okay,
We have
sorry.
a brain.
I've come prepared with a prop. So this is actually someone in our trial's brain.
Oh,
So
wow.
we do an MRI scan. We remove the skull to just show the brain itself. And this is what a person's brain actually looks like. Spatially, like the same size. Like this is the size of a human brain. They don't
Very
come
cool.
painted. That was me. So, but in the area in blue, that is sort of considered motor cortex, or the motor area of the brain. This is the region that is sending signals to your muscles to move in very specific ways. The pink region is somatosensory cortex. And this is the region that when you touch something with your hand, you touch something with your foot, it sends that signal back to the brain, to this region to then distribute it everywhere in the brain. So you have a motor region of the brain and a sensory region of the brain. These tiny silver metal pieces, as you can see, are the size of our implants. So they're quite small. And I mentioned we do 4 implants in this clinical trial. And you can see we've got 2 in the motor region in the blue and 2 little guys in the pink region in somatosensory cortex. And what we're trying to do is develop systems where from the blue implants, the motor implants, we decode the intention to move. So you're in a wheelchair, you can't move your body at all, or maybe just a bit. We want you to imagine an attempt grasping something with your arm. We then read out those signals to get them to control a robotic arm. So a robotic arm is attached to the table. They attempt to move, and we decode those signals so that the arm moves. And then what we do with the pink ones, the sensory ones, is then based off what the fingers touch on the robotic arm, we then stimulate, we give electrical charge to the sensory region, and we place these on where the fingers are in the brain, so that when we stimulate, they feel something on their fingers, even though they can't actually feel their fingers. So then what we can do is we can decode with the robotic arm as it moves in space, and they're imagining or attempting to move. And then we put little pressure sensors on the fingertips of the robotic hand, so that when it grabs something like a cup, we then stimulate so that they feel what the robotic hand is touching. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is wild.
Look at Catherine's face.
I know.
Whoa.
Yeah. I guess there's also a bit like an important bit of like side information there, that in the somatosensory cortex you do have that like map of, I guess, at least fingers. Maybe you can just kind of explain that a tiny bit.
Yeah, so our basic understanding of the brain for how it supports the body is there is a map of the body. And a map in a way that like each body part has its own sort of territory. The territory doesn't only support the body part, but like dominantly, this is the hand area, this is the foot area. And it's basically structured so that it goes like face down here, hand and arm here, and then feet sort of at the top of the brain, right at the top. And we try to place our implants specifically in regions of the hand and the arm to do these types of experiments. But you could imagine, and we can talk about other brain-computer interfaces in a bit, like there's a whole effort right now to decode speech. So for people that have lost the ability to talk from very severe ALS, putting these implants in these speech regions, in these motor face regions, so that even though they can't physically make articulate words, they can attempt to speak. We decode the attempt and then have the computer basically speak for them.
It's really hard to not keep saying, wow, fascinating. Wow, it's so interesting. It's like that's how I'm like keep trying to go. Because it is wild.
It's wild, right? And
Yeah.
it is sort of early science fiction of what we grew up with. But I do, at some point in this conversation, talk about sort of the reality of what we're doing compared to, say, Black Mirror. I think a lot of people watch Black Mirror and they're like, we can do that. That is real. We can control minds. And it's like, that isn't at all what is happening at all.
I think that's a nice lead in to the next question then. But actually, before we go to that question, I wanted to also comment on, I think it's nice, first of all, that you gave a visualization of it, because I think that's where the sci-fi can really come in and domineer in my mind anyway, is like what these things could potentially look like. So it's very cool that you're able to, give us a sort of idea. They're very small.
But they're small for a reason. There's a bunch of different devices on the market, and there are more sort of coming up. We talked about Neuralink in the beginning. They have to be small because you're pushing something into the brain. To get something into the brain, you have to puncture the brain. So the larger it is, the risk for a patient during these procedures is much higher.
I know with Neuralink, they have a robot, right, that does that sort of insertion. Is it the same in the case of this trial that you're talking about, that you're working on?
So with the devices we use in this trial, they're called Utah arrays. And basically like this square is essentially, it's the size of the implant, but it's like a square, in that you're just inserting the whole square, and within the square, there's a lot of electrodes. What's cool about Neuralink is they have threads.
Right.
And each thread they can sort of flexibly put into the brain. And they have a lot more threads than channels that we have. So they can target a lot more area and really try to more flexibly avoid blood vessels in the brain.
Right. Let's go to that question then about what you've touched on a bit as well, is that in recent news coverage, these brain-computer interfaces, they're often described, as you said, as having these sort of telepathic or mind-reading abilities. So are they actually capable of functioning in that way? What kind of things can brain-computer interfaces do right now? And I guess what are their limits as well?
This is such an important question. And I think, I don't know why people think, they hear about this stuff. They think the government's trying to put chips in our brains. They want to control our thoughts. We as scientists can make you think certain things. Like, we aren't there at all. And nor, I would argue, we may never be there in this century. So a lot of what we do is, imagine you're a scientist, right? You work with these surgeons to do this amazing work to get these implants safely into the brain. And then you show up in lab and you connect to your system and you're reading out little squiggles of individual channels firing. And you want to create systems that help people, right? You want them to be able to control an iPad on their own. So a lot of the work that's happening now is understanding the patterns across the squiggles, across the neurons, to create more complex systems. So what we can do now, we can control cursors pretty well. So moving a cursor across a screen, though there's still a lot more work to do in that space. We're getting good, or starting to figure out 3D effectors, like I talked about controlling a robotic arm. From controlling a cursor to controlling a robotic arm, like there's a lot more work to even make that leap. We cannot control sort of like a Minecraft character is sort of more than a cursor, right? Like, you're moving in 3 dimensions, similar to the arm. Like, we really haven't figured out how to do that type of stuff well. So right now, for control, what these systems can do is they can control cursors.
Right.
And for patients that, using an iPad to, like, I don't know, doom scroll on Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever have you, like, or talk to their loved ones, like use WhatsApp to talk to their healthcare provider about how they're doing. Like, I think we can all agree that these systems need to be developed and are critically important for these patients. So for the control stuff, that's where we're at. For the speech stuff, there's so much beautiful work happening. And there's some amazing videos you can look them up. Work by, there's a few researchers, but I'll specifically speak to Sergei Stavisky. He's a neuroscientist at University of California, Davis. They've been working with ALS patients that have lost the ability to talk. They implant these implants in the face area of the brain. and they're decoding the attempt to speak. And they've trained trained the voice of the computer that's decoding the speech. They built it using old audio recordings of the patients before they lost their ability to speak, so that it sounds like them. Some of the example, the first time I saw the examples, I was like fully at a conference, like crying.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
makes sense.
There's one of the patients where he's talking to his like 5-year-old daughter for the first time since he's lost his voice. And he says, "Where's my little cheetah?" And she always wears like cheetah pajamas. And it's like, this is a man who's fully wheelchair bound, that has a very quickly developing illness. He can't move his body at all. He can't speak. And this technology is being able to like allow him to communicate to his daughter. Speech, we're learning a lot to decode speech, and there's still so much work to do to make these systems as good as what we can do naturally. So that's motor. I don't know how long we keep going. I mean, there's sensory, there's visual neuroprosthetics being developed. Like,
yeah, I think.
But for motor, yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's really nice, I guess, to highlight as well. Like, there's a distinction, right? Because they can have such a transformative potential for these people's lives and to improve their quality of life so substantially. But then at the same time, it's so important to have that clarification about what they can and can't do, because I guess you don't want to have these sort of misconceptions and to give people false hope about certain I guess functions as well. If you have a lot of the language tends to be a bit futuristic, you know, like telepathy and mind reading, those sort of phrases, I guess, could maybe not paint a whole picture of, you know, some limitations that these things could have as well.
Yeah, you mentioned expectations, and I want to say one thing towards this. We all want to restore like lost sensation to people, and they hear about these technologies, and we are making a lot of advancements, and it's very, very exciting. But I think something I hope the general public will just sort of hold hands with scientists a bit here is it's going to take a lot of investment and a lot of work to get these technologies to where I think the public thinks they are. And the unfortunate reality is when like recruiting patients for trials for Neuralink or for a lot of these different devices, there is an expectation that these systems will restore everything you've lost. And they're just not there at all. And I think understanding where we are and the amazing developments that have been made and why we need to continue to develop these devices is so important, so that one day we can get there, but also for patients that do these trials purely for research, where there's no sort of clinical benefit for them at home, or for patients where we're starting to see some clinical benefit at home, they're aware of what these things can and can't do. Yeah, that whole expectation argument, I think, is so important. Because the public is just lost in this, like, we can read your brain and we can do anything with your brain. It's like, babe, we're like in the lab, like trying to understand how neurons talk to each other to control a cursor. Like, everyone needs to calm down.
Yeah, this is a really tricky issue we have with like science journalism or like clickbait in the news as well, because even like the term mind reading, it's just been taken to just such an extreme end to make sure that someone opens that article. And actually, when you talk about like how kind of Chloe and I's like jaws dropped when you pulled out the model of the brain, like when you pull it back to like the simple but also complex neuroscience, that's exciting enough. Like, we don't need to make it sci-fi to you know, make it interesting to the public. We just need to explain like how these things work and be honest about like what we know and where we're at. I think it's really helpful.
I completely agree. And centering all of it on sort of what the actual goal is, like even Neuralink, where I think if you were to ask the average person, what is the goal of Neuralink? To implant all of our brains? No, The goal of these devices is targeted for patients with severe clinical disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can all have sort of opinions about sort of, okay, once they do that, what are they going to do next? But the reality of what we are living in now, the challenges our teams are working on for them, for all of the devices, is how do we restore lost function for people that have very severe disorders?
Yeah. I think that's an important, distinction to make, is like this restoration of function, as you said, versus this sort of like blurry line that we have in at least media coverage or in the public perception, that it's like this enhancement. So you have this enhancement, like the superhuman brain, that kind of idea, rather than it really where we are right now is trying to get it to work for people who could really benefit from that restoration.
I completely agree.
We've talked a bit about how some of these brain-computer interfaces are invasive. So that means that they would require surgery to place parts of that device inside the skull or on the brain. And in research, how do scientists actually test whether a device like that is safe and whether it actually works? And could you maybe tell us a bit about whether these tests have been carried out on brain-computer interfaces so far?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and it's an important question for everybody listening. There have been so many tests done before any implant is put in any patient. The teams of people, like, this isn't a single scientist at any lab or company taking on this work. Hundreds of people that have expertises as scientists, that, like myself, I know a lot about the brain, people that have backgrounds in neurosurgery, understanding how to implant these devices, people that are occupational therapists, understanding sort of how to work with patients after they're implanted. Like, it's a whole team of people to ensure that these implants go safely. But even prior to the implant, the number of studies that need to be run showing that these devices are biocompatible is the word that is used. So how compatible something is with biology, biological tissue. The FDA in the US, there's so much testing that has to go into understanding how these devices work before anything is ever implanted in any human participant. So safety is fundamental to everything that is done. And in many ways, we're holding hands with the regulators, at least in the US, holding hands with the FDA, where they are sort of every step of the way involved with everything we do. Because like the general public, we want to push these technologies forward, but we want to do it responsibly.
I wonder, whilst you've mentioned safety, I can ask about the data, because there will be like such rich neural and behavioral data surely produced by their brain-computer interfaces. And what happens to that data, or like who owns the data? How will it be used? Is it shared amongst the research community? Like how is that regulated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say for all of these things, I am not speaking on behalf of the University of Pittsburgh. I'm not speaking on behalf of the clinical trial we are running. All of the answers I provided and will continue to provide are me speaking to the general field. I just want to make that disclaimer very clear. In terms of data, for what's currently being done, I mean, a lot of the work that's been done are very specific experiments, meaning like we build a task, like we want you to move your arm, move your leg. We record while you're doing that task, and then we can analyze that data to understand a specific question. Or if you're sending a system home with a user, asking them to try to paint, like in the paint software using their cursor. Where you're just maybe not even recording the data, you're just having something running offline. So I think what we do with data, I think it's very important to clarify sort of what we do and don't record. The bulk of anything like during actual control, we're not really even saving. It's more of just like to test things. For what we do save for all the labs, I think I can speak to is there's a lot of, I mean, coming back to the regulators, there's a lot of work done to ensure this data is anonymized It's stored very, very heavily. I think coming back to the telepathy point, the mind reading point,
Mm-hmm.
I think people think, oh, they're saving data of like your thoughts. But the reality is like, okay, I've got this little implant in the brain and we're
Mm-hmm.
recording from like a bunch of neurons and it's just a bunch of squiggles of like the 5 minute period of doing something. Like to decode these things to have any meaningful information, like it's very abstract is what I'm trying to say, the actual data of what it is. But to your point of data storage, we do quite a bit.
Yeah. Which is quite like, it's like mirroring what we do across like all neuroscience research, right? Like we're de-identifying everything. And yeah, I think that's such an important point to make, because people might think that you do have like a list of thoughts that have gone through someone's head, but like in reality, we literally have columns and columns of numbers that are supposed to represent something, and that's literally what we're dealing with every day. Like words would be like qualitative data from an interview would be way more identifiable than anything that you get out of these studies.
And we have to remember the size of our implants. Like this is such a
Mm-hmm.
critical point. The brain has billions of neurons, billions, supporting things that feel very easy and natural to us. Like I'm thinking of a memory, moving my hand, like all of these neurons that all play a role, and they all play a role in supporting these behaviors. We're sampling from a tiny, tiny amount of them to understand, to ask very specific questions. Like it's so far away from anything related to even a thought. Like it's
Yeah.
patterns in our sample that we're looking for, rather than like what the person had for breakfast that morning or what
Mm-hmm.
their who their clinician is. Like we don't have any of this at all.
The fear might be exacerbated sometimes when you think about, I guess, companies that are creating these devices and
Mm.
companies that would store the data rather than maybe universities. I don't know, that's maybe one distinction where maybe the public mistrust might be there for, yeah, the potential for misuse of data, brain data in that way. But I think it's so important, as you said, to reinforce that point that we're not collecting, thoughts that are written down or what that even means. Yeah, it's a lot more basic than that. We have a lot less information than what media coverage might lead us to believe.
I also think you bring up a great point about this, like what's done in universities versus what's done in companies, and this
Mm-hmm.
fear of like people have of companies taking these things on. But the reality is, as a university professor with some PhD students, some research assistants, maybe some postdocs, there's only so much you can do. Like if our goal as a society is to restore
Mm-hmm.
lost function, to develop these technologies, a university team cannot do this. Understanding that universities play a crucial role in like defining what the landscape looks like for what is possible, so
Mm-hmm.
that companies can come in and be like, you've done enough work for us to have the expertise of like with scaling these things, to then take on that challenge. Like if our goal is to solve these problems, first there's the research component, and second, actually the distribution of that. And universities can't do that. It has to be companies.
I mean, you need hundreds of millions of dollars as well, right? To even conduct a trial.
100%. I mean, if you look at least in the US, they do a lot of workshops on like how long it takes you to get a device to market, and they always kill me because it's like it's a 20-year like timeline. The early trials you need to do to then, maybe you're doing a study in mice very, very early on like biocompatibility, and then it's you implant one person, and that study of just the one person takes 5 years, and then you implant six
Mm.
people, and that study takes 7 years, and like the
Mm.
scaling of these things I mean, for Neuralink is a good example to get to where they are now. Like the field has been churning away for a while so that some of these companies can now start to run. I don't think as a public, what we should be saying is like, no, don't. It's more of understanding sort of what are regulators doing
Right.
to walk with them, understanding that the goal of these companies is really to develop medical products for patients, and that that is a goal that we all have.
This is a big reason why we have these conversations and like create this podcast, is to actually explain the current state of the evidence, because as we've kind of touched on before, like the media and the public discourse often skips like 10, 20, 100 years ahead with trying to figure stuff out, which of course is important because we have to think about where it's going to go. But I think a lot of the time, like explaining where the research is at is actually needed to just be a bit more transparent and to kind of like provide people with the information of where it's at right now, instead of kind of fueling the worry, which is, I think, is what happens in the media.
And also the acknowledgement of the, I guess, yeah, different types of groups of people that have to work together to get these things to actually, be usable, including regulatory boards, maybe investment, and then there needs to be the research as well. So yeah, an important point. I had another question about, so we talked a bit about testing these devices. And one thing that I look at, and so does Catherine in our research, is how individuals differ in terms of their brain development. So we know that there's a lot of individual variation in terms of how brains are structured and how they function between individuals. So given that we're carrying out these tests, and I guess in some cases, these tests of brain-computer interfaces to see whether they're safe or if they're efficacious, they have, I think, small numbers of people. So how then do we know that they're going to be effective for many different people and not just that group that was tested in a clinical trial?
Yeah, this is such a good question. With all of the devices that are currently implanted in patients, there is variability in how well they work. And there's variability for, I mean, you touched on this, for so many reasons. Like, I mean, we're all different in our ability to move our bodies and our ability to, our critical thinking skills. Like, there's so many differences about every single person. If you take all of that just sort of abstractly and then you add on, like, even for the brain itself, like every brain is different in terms of where the blood vessels are, where how big certain areas are, how small certain areas are. Like all of this variability is what makes us human. It's a beautiful part of what makes us human, but it goes into these trials. And so, as you said, as we implant more people, we're understanding the nature of that variability a bit better. Understanding sort of what things work well for everybody, what things work well for some people, and the thing we're only starting to figure out, which I have a paper coming out next week, what are the factors that we think drive why some people are better users than others with these types of technologies. Like ALS is a great example of a disease that we're still trying to understand how it impacts the brain, but it is a clinical population for brain-computer interfaces. And so it's like this tricky balance of these people they get this disorder, they quickly degrade in their function. Their like average lifespan after diagnosis is like 4 years on average. So they're at some point they will pass quickly. And so trying to use this opportunity when they're so generous of wanting to participate in this research to push us forward, but also understanding that their brain is dying to a degree. Like it's such a difficult component of all of it that contributes to all of the variability. So all I can say to it is we steadily move forward and we try to understand the variability so that we can sort of make micro adjustments along the way of factors that we think impact that variability that we can control.
really nicely said in terms of looking at it as we're still on the journey, we're still understanding how that variation exists and what it means.
I think also historically, an important number that people should just sit with. In human history, we've now implanted our 100th person with an implant. And that's across all devices for intracortical implants, implants that go directly into the brain, implants that have been implanted and then explanted. Like, we've done 100 people across all of these different groups, all of these different companies, and everyone's independently trying to understand these variability problems. Like, we just don't have enough data to speak to a lot of this stuff. So early days, I would say.
An interesting number, only 100. Because I guess that's something that's blown out of proportion in terms of the way it's conceptualized in news coverage. Is it's as if it's ready and it's here and it's ready to be used, but we're really at early stages in terms of the implanting bit.
We've you've talked about this throughout in terms of like the kind of exciting things that we can learn and the potential progress that we can make, specifically in like motor, but also in speech. But what is next in brain computer interface research? Like, what do you want to see in the next 5 years?
5 years is just not enough.
Yeah.
It's like with everything we've talked about, we will have this conversation in 5 years from now, and we will have some developments, but small developments. Like, the scale at which these things will get better, like, we need so much more time. But in 5 years, where I think a lot of the critical developments are, what Neuralink is doing with having a system that's fully implantable, meaning they have nothing sticking out of their heads. It's all within the head. Patients, they have a lot of electrodes, so they're able to target more territory. These systems are working really well for their users. So I think it's exciting to see sort of a motor system for cursor control that is like scaling. Because as we said, that's the first thing academics figured out is cursor control. And that's the first thing that should scale to patients. So seeing a company being able to push that further and start to implement more people and seeing the clinical trial results of how it's improving function, I think is a lot of what we're going to see from Neuralink over the next 5 years. And the public should be very interested in seeing that data and understanding sort of to what degree it is and is not helping people. So on the motor front, I think that's huge. I think seeing something like that come up in the speech domain, where for people that have lost the ability to speak, seeing a product like that come to market would be amazing. I mean, it doesn't currently exist. All the stuff I've talked about is from research labs. So whether it's the Neuralink device or a different device, Paradromics is a building a company, BlackRock Neurotech. They're actively working on this as well. So seeing something like this where patients with severe ALS that have lost the ability to speak could have a system that could speak for them as they attempt to speak would be amazing. I mentioned a bit stimulation. So we're developing paradigms where we give electrical signals to the brain, and you feel something, and we ask, what do you feel? And so we're getting pretty good at being able to like stimulate where we can say like, oh, you will definitely feel that on your thumb, or you'll feel that on your pinky if we stimulate a certain way. But to a greater scale than that, we really like we can't stimulate the thumb versus the pad of the thumb very well, or the tip versus the base of the index finger. Like, improving the scale of how to deliver really small signals to the brain and making sure it's interpreted in the way that we want it to. There's a lot of work to do there, so that you could imagine you have like a body that touches things and you can feel everything it's touching, and to a very small degree, like that needs to be figured out. And the last thing I'll say is visual brain-computer interfaces, which we haven't really touched on, but in visual cortex, for people that in adulthood have lost the ability to see, and they used to be able to see, developing systems that allow them to see again. Right now, I'm not currently doing this work, but labs that are delivering stimulation in visual cortex and asking patients what they see. And so far, we can kind of like generate phosphenes, which is basically like, imagine complete darkness and you see a little light like in your visual field. We're starting to understand how, I mean, we can definitely evoke a single phosphene, but how to do more with that, where like something that's on the left side of your visual field or the right side of your visual field, just so you could have little lights of like, I'm getting close to something. Or there's so much in the visual domain that we are only beginning on the academic side to start to explore. So I would love to see more work done there. So yeah, so many things.
I really love that. Like a thread throughout this whole conversation is about restoration and like bringing it back to the participants and just making it clear that we're actually trying to help people. Whereas when you talk about these kind of interfaces, like the general discourse is like sci-fi and reading thoughts and like all these things that we've talked about. So it's been so nice to actually understand like the core of the point of this work and like how useful it could actually be and how it could potentially change people's lives.
Earlier you said, I guess it's hard to put these things down into a time frame, right? But you mentioned something about the next century. I think it's interesting to look at this as like it's very much an ongoing process, right? And we're making small steps all of the time.
Yeah, and to combine both of your points, the challenges now for the next few decades are clinical products. And I hopefully can speak to everyone around the world that we just want clinical products so that if your mom has a horrible fall and loses the ability to move her body, or your dad has severe ALS and you watch him slowly lose the ability to move and the ability to speak, you want to be able to go to your clinician and hear down the line, and these things are not affordable right now, and they're like all research trials and they're all expensive, but something that is possible that could help your parent in that time. Like there is something that exists, and none of this stuff exists yet. So that's why the next few decades, it's like, how do we build robust, safe clinical devices for patients?
Yeah, I guess touching on the long term wear as well that you said, making sure that it's safe in the long term to have these implants.
Yeah, and all the language around the proposals with the regulators, around the research studies, they're all about safe trials. They're all about understanding sort of restoring simple function. None of it at all is at all related to enhancement, mind reading, people saving your data. Like it's all just people that really want to, speaking for myself, I believe in a future where these technologies could exist for patients. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done for that to be a reality.
I think that will be reassuring to people to know as well, though, that's what the safety guidelines look like.
I think it's a nice note to end on as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we are running out of time. Like that went really fast. We've been chatting for an hour already.
Yeah.
It was the brain. You saw it and you were just like,
I know.
Oh my goodness, you got lost.
It was our first prop. The
first that's
prop.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I feel honored.
Hunter, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to us today. That's been really mind opening, eye opening for me.
Both.
So yeah, both to, I guess, understand what are they actually doing right now? What is the capability of a brain computer interface now? And looking at the goal, I guess, is one thing I'm really taking away as well, in terms of, instead of getting swept up in the sci-fi spiel, trying to look at these devices as really transformative. Their potential is very transformative for people. And there's some misconceptions about how they're currently talked about in the media, for sure. So it's been, very, very informative today. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. And for anyone listening, for all the work that I talked about, this is in development. So it's like we need a next generation group of scientists coming up that are keen to work on these problems, because hopefully one of your takeaways from this conversation is this is going to take a while to figure out. And we need people, in the UK especially, there's, with Neuralink setting up clinical trials for their devices, there's a lot of work happening. I know at University College London working on this work, as well as at the University of Nottingham. So it's a great opportunity for people to get involved into something that will hopefully be a pioneering piece of technology for next generations.
Yeah, we can definitely link to some of your articles, and you mentioned some videos as well from Researcher. Maybe we can link to some of the research groups that you're talking about as well, just in case there's anyone listening that's interested in science, is maybe like doing their undergrad and they're interested in doing like their research project with one of these teams. Like they can definitely find out more on the website from there as well.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Hunter for coming onto the podcast today. Make sure you sign up to the newsletter at scienceorfiction.co.uk to get new episodes in your inbox. For the rest of the series, we'll be asking for your questions on social media. So follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Science or Fiction Podcast, and you can ask your questions to the experts. If you want to get in touch or you have a suggestion for a future topic, you can email us at info@scienceorfiction.co.uk or DM us on social media. Thank you to Chloe Carrick and Anushka D for producing this episode, the Young Person Advisory Groups for their input on this neuroscience series, to Amalia Odutola for the social media content, to Kit Studio for the branding, and to Jamie Johnson for the music. See you next time.